Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick, axslav, ranish, as we explore tactics and strategies using the game of Starcraft 2. Today, we're going to take a look at a couple of games from the WCS America Premier League Group G. Of course, first, we're going to take a look at one of the Send versus Crank games, talking about how to make that PvZ boss army, get all the cool Protoss units, and how the game can play out if you're aiming for that from the start of the game. Then we're going to talk about some 2-base Colossus timings in another game between Crank and Send, and then talk about fast Ultralists in Zerg vs Protoss in Huck vs Send. After these three segments, we'll get to the viewer Q&A, so submit any questions you have to me on Twitter at @IsAxslav or in a YouTube comment under any of the videos, Rules of Engagement videos at youtube.com/official MLGSC2. So on to our first segment. It's going to be talking about making that boss army in PvC. A couple things we want to talk about are going to be first, how to take a third base while teching from a Protoss perspective, and then how to deal with Colossi Void Ray from a Zerg perspective, that type of composition. Then also properly transitioning to the late game when you realize the game is going to go a little bit long. So we're starting this replay off at the 7-minute mark. And of course, we'll just start this off here. Not too much has happened. Crank did, he did a Forge Expo with the in-base Forge, so that's why you don't see the Forge at the wall. But it was a Forge expansion, not a Gateway expansion. And of course, Sen did, a fast 3-hatch. Now starting to get his some of his gases, or extra ones. He had 2 level 4. But basically started Lair, Zerging Speech, who should follow shortly. And a pretty standard game here. Phoenix is coming out to harass. But the one thing we want to take a look at, well, let's X2 this maybe, is the build that Crank is doing. So, of course, the Phoenixes are scouting. They're also going to get, you should always be using every 50 energy to kill a drone if you can't get a queen, because there's going to be spores to defend the queens. Just keep picking stuff off where you can, run away before you lose shields. But what he's doing behind us is he's going to try to get a Doom composition, right? So you can see he's got the airplay already, and he's going straight to Colossi Tech. Right here we can see that Robotics Bay. Basically, the instant he had money, he started the Robotics facility. As soon as that finished, he then added the Robotics Bay, going straight to those Colossi, using a Phoenix, of course, to scout to make sure his opponent wasn't doing something that Colossi wouldn't be good against, like some crazy muted transition, then he just get more air. So now he's at the point where he wants to think about taking that third base, right? So Crank wants to take the third base as fast as possible. But right now, because he's teching so aggressively in both air and for Colossi, he doesn't have very many units, right? So he's going to go out and go ahead and take that third base. But the important thing is that his units are more important than his third base, because if he loses this force here, he'll then lose the third base anyway, right? So it's better to lose the third base than lose your army, because then you'll lose the army and you lose the third base anyway. So he's going to take the third base, but if his opponent does a committed attack, he obviously cannot defend it because his army really isn't that big. So his Phoenixes spot all these roaches crossing the map, and he says, okay, this many roaches, it's 10 minutes in the game, they'll probably shortly have roach speed. I need to pull my army back, right? And this is, yes, these roaches are now going to walk up here and, of course, kill this third base. But in the meantime, at least he's getting a lot of roach kills using the Phoenix, which is actually a pretty good use of Phoenix. 50 energy for roach kills is a great trade. Otherwise it'd be a drone, and a roach is worth more than a drone. In most in-game situations, there's some exceptions, but in general, you'd rather kill roach than a drone. So it's always better to use that third base than lose your important units. Make sure you keep your sentries, your Colossus, and Void Rays, Phoenixes all alive. Now from the Zerg perspective, he now sees the Void Ray. He knows he's dealing with Colossi Void Ray. Sen knows that. And if you know your opponent's teching very aggressively, there's 2 things you want to do. Number 1, delay that third base for as long as possible. So he definitely should get that first cancel. He's going to even try to get a second cancel here. This time, Crank feels he has enough units to defend it, but he has to use that Nexus as a shield, cancel it again, right? Just keep trying to delay that third base as long as possible. Right here, you can back away or run in. I think he got a little greedy trying to get this one Colossus kill. He's going to lose a lot of roaches there. So that might have been a little overly aggressive, but he could have just backed away. Make sure you delay the third as long as possible. They should not get an early third if they're trying to tech fast. And Colossi Void Ray is definitely something where the Protoss is teching quite fast. The next thing you want to do is notice, even while he was doing that, he was already starting Hive Tech very early on, because he's realizing he's up against Colossi Void Ray. If he builds a lot of Hydralists, they'll all die to Colossi Void Ray, because Hydralists aren't actually very good against this composition on their own. But what else can he build? They can shoot Void Rays. He can build a Spire, and he can build Corruptors, but they're actually pretty bad against Void Rays. If he tries to go mass mutas, as long as his opponent sees it in time, supporting Guardian Shield, Sentries, Phoenixes, and those aren't going to work that great either. especially considering there are Phoenixes out here that have been scouting around, or maybe they just died. But for most part, they've been around scouting around, so it would be hard to do a hidden muted transition. And then you're thinking, okay, so what do I have this action to beat this competition? The key thing to beat Colossi Void Ray is the Viper. There's other things that work well, like Swarm Hosts are actually very good against this as well, but if you already went Roach Hydra or Roaches as an opening and you committed heavily to that, you're best off going straight for Vipers as soon as possible. So now he's at a situation where he's kind of got this Roach Hydra competition. He needs to wait for Vipers so he can actually combat this army, because without Vipers, the Colossi and Force Fields, you can't touch them. And you don't want to go Corruptors against this, because to take this many Voiders and Colossi, you need like 30 Corruptors, which is extremely cost inefficient, and it means that you won't have any ground forces, so you'll just die to the Stalkers and Zealots and Sentries anyway. So you don't really want to go Corruptors against this unless you're ahead in macro and you can overwhelm them. That sometimes works. But Vipers are really your go-to unit. So as he's coming in here, all right, now he's thinking, I'm in this position where I'm stuck on Roach, Hydra, Viper, right? So that's exactly where he is right now. He's on Roach, Hydra, Viper. And he, in fact, is maxed out. Crank is not quite maxed out yet. But any moment he waits means the Protoss gets more and more units. And if we take a look at the Army tab, right now we can see that the Army's values are almost exactly identical right now. Both players over here, very, very, very similar Army sizes. They're almost exactly identical, but Sen's maxed out. Crank still has some food. So Crank's army will get stronger over time. Sen needs to make something happen now because he has all those Roaches and Hydralists, which are kind of supply heavy, but not that effective. And so that's why he's looking for this engagement now. And this is a very tricky spot, is because if you look at the Protoss army, right, we're talking about you have to deal with Templar, which right now they don't have Storm, but they have feedback. You have to deal with, there's like 5, 6 sentries. Maybe there's only 4, but there's several sentries in there that have a lot of energy, so that's a lot of force fields. And you've got these Time Warps. So, and there's the Photon Cannons there as well. So this is a very difficult defense to crack, but Sen can't afford to wait around too long. So he has 2 options. One is to try to trade as effectively as he can right here, and the other is to split up and do multi-attack. So I don't know if he would have been better off if he, sent some units and attack over in this area, and then, waited for Crank's response and then attack from the front. But as is, he's just going to try to frontal attack. And the key thing in this battle to keep note of, as you watch this, is keep an eye on these Templar. As a Zerg player, oops, sorry, let me bring up the thing there. As a Zerg player, you always want to keep your eye on these Templar. And it's so important to keep your eye on those Templar because you're not microing too much. You're just attack moving, you're macroing behind it. But what you want to do is you need to get those abducts, preferably beyond the Colossi, but the Void Rays to be okay as well. But the Vipers can only get to abducts if the Templar aren't there to feedback. So you send in the rest of your army first. And you have to see, okay, the Templar are in the front. I'll focus them down with my Roaches Hydras. If they're in the back, then my Vipers can go snag the Colossi. Just look at where the Colossi or Void Rays are. Templar are in front of those units. You focus those down with Roach Hydras. If they're behind those units, then your Vipers can get those abducts off before they get fed back. So keep an eye on this as we take a look at this battle. This is really what determines the micro, is how good the Protoss is at keeping those Templar alive, and also how good the Zerg is at controlling the Vipers and the rest of their army. So right here already, as soon as two Time Warps go down, he doesn't have that many hits in him. He probably should back off and try to hit from a different angle. I know it kind of sucks because then he has to wait 30 seconds for him to go away, or maybe it's a little shorter. It is shorter. But and of course, every time that goes by, Crank gets stronger. But fighting in Time Warps against this competition is very difficult because you want to be able to run forward and snipe the Templar if needed to. And right now, I see the Vipers come around the bottom. The Templar are still here. They're zoning them out. I mean, maybe he could snag one Void Ray. In fact, that's what he does. He goes for the Void Rays. Ideally, he'd get the Colossi, but there's no way with those Templar there. And the Time Warps disable the units from coming in and killing those Templar. But as is, he was able to get 3 Void Rays, so it's not a total loss. In fact, he gets some of the Templar too as they come in to try to get those feedbacks. And he's in a situation where, yes, he's going to lose this battle because the Protoss army, if you count the Warpins, is actually stronger than his. But if he can take out key units, the Void Rays, the Colossi, and he needs to keep his Vipers alive, right? These are important units. Keep the Vipers alive. It's not going to be hopeless because, yes, if you look at that, he didn't trade super efficiently. Maybe close to evenly if you discount the Phoenix Harass earlier. But he's able to max out so much faster because, one, he took a third base faster because he didn't tech as heavy, right? So it's okay to be quite a little bit less efficient. And also, he only lost one of his very important Vipers. So going forward, he's in a situation where his most important units are actually still around. But now going forward, he has his decision. Okay, I delayed him from getting that Doom competition. but he's still on his way there. He has Templar Tech up. He doesn't quite have Storm yet, but he's working on it. He has, you know, some Void Rays. I reduced the count, and he has some Colossi, but he's going to keep rebuilding these. What's my advantage right now? Well, he won't have Time Warps because he lost that Mothership Core in the battle. Even if he did, wouldn't have energy. And he has much less Force Fields. So going forward, if I can attack him again and get a couple more good abducts off on some of his key units, without Time Warps or Force Fields, and without key units, I'm going to win this game. So this is a situation where Sen, instead of transitioning to a late game, he felt that first engagement was strong enough that he could overpower Crank. But he's still in a situation where he has to either deny the third base or he has to transition out of Roach Hydra. So right now he's still trying to keep the army small, keep denying the third base, and he gets 2 abducts, but unfortunately he actually was microing forward when he did abduct, so they were semi-counterproductive. But as is, he still had to take out a lot of these important units yet again and keep the armies very, very, very small. The armies are small, then Roach Hydra can be competitive. If your opponent maxes out, they stay on a 3-base economy for too long, the Roach Hydra is going to be much less effective. But here's the tricky part. Right now he's trying to swarm over his opponent yet again, but he lost both those Vipers in that engagement, and there's no Vipers in the production tab. So he's going back to just pure Roach Hydra, which we talked about before, how important those Vipers are in this composition, which means he has to immediately go on attack before his opponent gets more than 1 or 2 Colossi, before his opponent gets more than 1 Time Warp, before his opponent warps in any additional Storms. This is a timing where right now he has to deny the third basic Crank because he has no high-tech units in his composition. There's no high-tech at all. Zergon low-tech cannot let a Protoss sit on 3 bases of economy. Although I guess now it's more like 2.5, although the most important thing are the gases, which are still mining. So every second he waits is extremely, extremely important. And as we see as he comes in here, he forgot to build Roaches. So he comes in here and he looks at this battle, and he's like, oh no, I forgot to build Roaches. And of course, without Roaches, he feels he has to go in anyway. But without Roaches, there's no way with 2 Colossi. He just takes a bunch of losses, even loses the Vipers. He's going to try to come in here and fight, but it's insanely cost inefficient. And now he's stuck in this position where, okay, I didn't build the Roaches, but yet I still have enough Hydras. I can't chase him up here because I don't have the Roaches, but I can control the low ground. And this is actually, let's back this up a little bit. This is actually the moment where he had to take some advantage of that fact that he controlled this low ground right. As soon as Crank has to back up because he has to wait for another warp and a game he needs to tank, right here, Sen's in a position where, okay, unit count. I lost both the Vipers. I'm not building any high-tech units, which means I have to do something now before he's able to replenish. Or in fact, doesn't have to replenish. He already has a bunch of high-tech units before he just basically, in a minute or two, he'll warp in enough buffer units that I'll be in trouble. So right here would be really great if you just you take some more units right here and you form a you just keep some of the Hydralists, a pack right here, a pack right here, and then you send in another pack just straight down into this natural. And if you think about it, you don't need that many units. And you know what? You're still not going to trade super effectively because he's got ranged Colossi. They can come, they can poke, and they can run away. Hydras are a little bit faster to range Colossi, which is a trick because you can't charge them up the ramp. And you want to make sure those Colossi to attack you. In fact, this should actually be a little further back because you want to make sure those Colossi, they get in this zone right about, you want to make sure they get in this zone right about here. Because as soon as those Colossi have to go to this point to attack your forces, then you can run in and they'll take them too long to get back up the ramp, so you'll be able to close the distance and slap them off with the speed advantage your Hydras have. So ideally, I guess you'd have to put the units right here. Sorry, I misput them by a bit. And then a small force goes down there, and maybe you can make something happen. But this is what really is super important, because yes, Zerg's ahead in supply, but he's not remaxing with high-tech units, which means he has to get something done now. And unfortunately, it's a tough call, but he decides he can't. And so he put himself in a position where he kind of was obligated to get, you know, a nice little damage done, maybe segmenting a few guys off, taking down the Cyber Core, so he can replenish well. Even just trying to run the Hydras back behind the mineral line, maybe a squad of 6 to 8. You could try to get something done. With Warpins, it would be very tough, but you're in a situation now because he never replaced those Vipers. And actually, never mind, I forgot. He forgot Hydra speed, so actually that was a move he couldn't have done anyway, because that whole tactic relied on the fact that Hydras are faster than Colossi, which is only true if you get the speed upgrade. So going forward, now he's in a situation where even if he can not afford the Crank, he has no Vipers, and he's faced off against an opponent who has a whole bunch of Psi Storms, a whole bunch of Colossi, and Time Warps, and the food difference is only about 40. As we can see here, of course, the Time Warps come down, Storms come down, and basically everything's dying to Storms. I mean, the Protoss has so few gate units, he gets in here, he's actually going to take out some of these Colossi, but he's trading so ineffectively that he's going to lose everything for just the Templar and Colossi portion of Protoss army, or Protoss still has 5 Void Rays left over. I mean, assuming these Roaches are just going to run forward and probably not do too much here. And that's not a trade you want to have happen. You don't want to lose your whole army and still have them have a good chunk of their army left. Now he's rebuilding the Vipers again, but now he's in this position where he doesn't have that max army anymore. He's only 160 food, and so, of course, from this point on, Crank's is going to rebuild up a very, very strong army. And then the next engagement, even though he does have these Vipers as he's coming in here, he does have the Vipers, but he doesn't have the mass Roaches or mass Hydras. He just has a few, and yet again, the Storms are just going to pretty much totally wipe everything, and that's going to be the game. So from here on out, Crank just counter pushes and wins the game. He's too far ahead. What's really important that game, though, what really decided, is the fact that Sen, at a certain moment, he decided, I'm not going to reproduce Vipers. I'm going to spend all my money on a Roach Hydra composition, and I'm just going to try to end the game now because I know he's out of Force Fields, he's out of Time Warps, and he's only going to have maybe 2 Colossi by the time I can counter swing. And the unfortunate thing is, though, he went all Hydras. If he had a few Roaches, he probably could have muscled up the ramp and won the game. So it wasn't his thought process was wrong. He just hit a little bit of the wrong keys when he's holding them down. Maybe held down the H key a little bit too long. He just switch it over. But the idea was right. But it was a very committed attack, and it was a very killer instinct that led him to decide to do that. Unfortunately, couldn't quite end the game. And then by the time he was able to finally reproduce the Vipers, there was 8 Templar out, 3 Colossi, and like 7 Void Rays. It was just too much of an army to beat with Roach Hydra. So a couple things to look back in the game and remember. One thing that's very, very important if you're a Protoss player, try to take your third as early as possible, but your units are more important. If they have too many guys and they cancel your third base, you lose a couple hundred minerals. If you lose your army, then you'll lose the third base anyway, and it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse. And of course also, if you're a Zerg player, or actually if you're any race, don't sit around too long on those low-tech units. That means if you're a Protoss player, you're massing Zealots and Stalkers in any of the 3 matchups. Don't just max out on Zealots and Stalkers and sit around giggling to yourself as your money gets piled higher, because those units, if your opponent maxes out with higher tech and a better composition, they're going to be worth this. Same thing Zerg, Roach Hydra. Even if you add in a few Vipers, it makes it much better, and it's necessary to add in those Vipers to make it work, but it's still not a composition you want to sit around at max food. So don't sit around too much on those late tech units. And then, of course, the last thing as a Protoss player, try to combine those Time Warps and Psi Storms. You saw how effective they were for Crank against that low-tech army of Sen. And also the Zerg player, if you don't want to be committed to constantly attacking and trying to make something happen, transition out of that Roach Hydra into either Swarm Host, Ultralisk Queen, whatever your favorite composition is. Wraps up this segment of Rules of Engagement. We'll take a short break and be on with our next segment, another game between Sen and Crank.